When the title company called me about irregularities in my property deed signature, I was sitting in my office reviewing quarterly reports for my consulting firm. I'll never forget that moment, the sudden cold that ran through my chest, the way my hand froze on the mouse, because I hadn't signed anything related to our house in over a year. I'm Owen, I'm 41 years old, and I run a management consulting firm that I built from the ground up over 15 years. My wife, well, soon-to-be ex-wife, Melissa, was 38, a real estate agent who'd been increasingly distant over the past year. We had 2 kids, Connor, age 9, and Sophie, age 7. Our marriage had its problems, sure, but I never imagined she'd commit actual fraud. That phone call from Rachel at Premier Title Company changed everything. She was apologetic, professional, but clearly concerned. They'd received paperwork for a refinance on our property, and during their standard verification process, something didn't match up. The signature on the new documents didn't align with the signature from our original purchase 7 years ago. They'd flagged it for review before processing anything further. I thanked her, kept my voice steady, and asked her to hold off on any actions until I could investigate. The moment I hung up, my mind started working through possibilities. Melissa handled most of our real estate paperwork. It was her field, after all. I'd trusted her completely with property matters, but forging my signature, that wasn't a mistake or miscommunication. That was deliberate, calculated fraud. I didn't confront her immediately. That would have been the emotional response, the amateur move. Instead, I did what I'd trained myself to do in business. I gathered information first. Over the next 2 days, I carefully reviewed every financial document I could access without alerting her. I checked our joint accounts, credit card statements, property tax records, anything that might give me insight into what she was planning. What I found was disturbing. Over the past 8 months, Melissa had been systematically shifting money into accounts I didn't have access to. She'd opened a separate checking account. I found the statements in her car when she left it unlocked one evening. She'd taken out a personal loan for $30,000 that I knew nothing about. And most damning, she'd been communicating extensively with a real estate attorney named Gregory Vaughn. I recognized his name immediately. Gregory Vaughn was known in our area as the attorney you hired when you wanted to hide assets in a divorce. He specialized in creative property transfers, complex financial arrangements, and aggressive divorce tactics. The fact that Melissa was working with him, combined with the forged signature, painted a clear picture. She was planning to leave me and trying to secure our house, worth roughly $480,000, as her sole property before filing for divorce. The rage I felt was like nothing I'd experienced before. This woman I'd built a life with, the mother of my children, was actively stealing from me. But I channeled that rage into focus. I needed proof. I needed documentation that would hold up in court. And I needed to move carefully because if she suspected I knew, she might accelerate her plans or destroy evidence. I called my attorney, Vincent Rossiter, a man I'd worked with on business contracts for years. Vincent was in his mid-50s, sharp as a blade and completely unflappable. When I explained the situation, he was silent for a long moment before responding. His advice was straightforward. First, secure copies of everything I'd found. Second, do not confront Melissa yet. Third, hire a private investigator to document her activities and gather additional evidence of fraud. And fourth, prepare for this to get extremely ugly because property fraud combined with divorce meant Melissa was playing for keeps. Vincent recommended a private investigator named Patricia Morgan. Patricia was a former police detective who'd gone private 15 years ago and specialized in financial fraud and domestic cases. When I met her at a coffee shop downtown 2 days later, she was exactly what I needed. Professional, thorough, and completely unsentimental about the work. I showed Patricia everything I'd gathered. She reviewed the documents carefully, asked detailed questions about our financial situation, and nodded slowly when I finished. She told me this was more common than people realized. Spouses attempting to transfer property before divorce to avoid equitable distribution. But the forged signature elevated it from civil asset hiding to criminal fraud. Patricia outlined her investigation plan. She would surveil Melissa's movements, document her meetings with Gregory Vaughn, obtain records of communications if legally possible, and most importantly, work with a forensic document examiner to prove the signature on the deed was forged. She estimated it would take 4 to 6 weeks to build a comprehensive case. The cost would be substantial, roughly $15,000 for the full investigation. I didn't hesitate. This was my house, my assets, my children's stability. I authorized the work immediately and transferred half the payment as a retainer. Living with Melissa during this period was surreal. She acted perfectly normal, asking about my day, discussing the kids' schedules, planning a family birthday party for Sophie. Meanwhile, I knew she was actively committing fraud against me. Every smile felt like a lie. Every casual conversation felt like a performance. I maintained my composure, played the role of the unsuspecting husband, and waited for Patricia to gather evidence. 3 weeks into the investigation, Patricia called me with an update. She'd been following Melissa and had documented multiple meetings with Gregory Vaughn at his office. She'd also discovered something significant. Melissa had been having an affair with a man named Trevor Hastings, a divorced commercial real estate developer she'd met through work. Patricia sent me photos. Melissa and Trevor at restaurants I'd never been to with her. Melissa and Trevor at a downtown hotel on a Tuesday afternoon when she'd told me she had client showings. Melissa and Trevor looking at properties together, properties she'd never mentioned to me. The betrayal went deeper than fraud. It was comprehensive. The most damaging evidence came from the forensic document examiner Patricia had hired. Dr. Raymond Chen was a certified expert who'd testified in federal fraud cases. He compared the signature on the forged deed with authentic samples of my signature from bank documents, business contracts, and our original home purchase. His analysis was devastating to Melissa's scheme. Dr. Chen identified 14 distinct discrepancies between my actual signature and the forged version. The pressure points were wrong. The letter formations didn't match. The flow was inconsistent with my natural signing pattern. He concluded with absolute certainty that the signature on the deed was not produced by my hand. He was willing to testify to this in court. Patricia also uncovered the mechanism of the fraud. Melissa had worked with a notary named Sandra Kilpatrick, a woman who'd notarized the forged deed without properly verifying my identity, because I'd never been there. Sandra had a history of notary violations and had apparently been paid to look the other way. This added another layer of criminal liability. By the time Patricia completed her investigation, I had a dossier that would destroy Melissa in any courtroom. Forensic proof of signature forgery, documentation of the fraudulent property transfer attempt, evidence of asset hiding through secret accounts, proof of her affair with Trevor. Records of her meetings with an attorney known for aggressive divorce tactics, and a pattern of financial deception spanning 8 months. Vincent reviewed everything and gave me his assessment. This wasn't just a divorce case anymore. This was criminal fraud, potentially involving multiple parties. He recommended I take 2 parallel paths, file for divorce immediately with full disclosure of the fraud, and report the forgery to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. I authorized both actions. Vincent prepared divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences, but included detailed evidence of financial fraud, adultery, and attempts to steal marital property. He also prepared a motion for temporary custody of Connor and Sophie, arguing that Melissa's criminal conduct made her an unsuitable guardian. Simultaneously, Vincent contacted the district attorney's office and provided them with Dr. Chen's forensic analysis and Patricia's investigation report. The night before I served Melissa with divorce papers, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to a woman who'd betrayed me in every possible way, knowing that in less than 12 hours her entire scheme would collapse. Part of me felt satisfaction at the coming justice. Part of me felt grief for what our family had been and would never be again. The process server arrived at our house at 8:30 in the morning on a Saturday. Melissa was in the kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. I'd positioned myself in my office, watching through the window. The server handed her the papers, stated the required legal notification, and left. I heard Melissa's scream from my office, then the sound of papers hitting the floor, then footsteps as she ran toward my office. She burst through the door, face flushed, eyes wild, holding the divorce petition. She demanded to know what I was doing. Her voice was shrill, panicked in a way I'd never heard before. I remained seated, kept my voice level, and told her exactly what I was doing. I was divorcing her for fraud, adultery, and attempting to steal our marital property through forged documents. Melissa's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, fear, and finally calculation. She tried to deny everything, said I was crazy, paranoid, making up accusations because I was stressed about work. But I could see in her eyes that she knew I had proof. You don't serve someone with divorce papers citing specific fraud unless you can back it up. I told her I'd hired a private investigator, that I had forensic evidence the signature on the deed was forged, that I knew about Gregory Vaughn and Trevor Hastings and the secret bank accounts, that I had documentation of everything she'd done over the past 8 months. The calculation in her expression shifted to panic. She asked how I knew, demanded to see my evidence, threatened to fight me on everything. I told her she'd see all the evidence in court, and that she should probably call Gregory Vaughn immediately because she was going to need exceptional legal representation. Then I stood, walked past her, and left the house. I'd already moved my essential belongings to a furnished corporate apartment near my office 2 days earlier. I'd arranged for Connor and Sophie to stay with my parents temporarily, telling them Melissa and I were having serious problems and needed space. Vincent had advised me to establish separate residence immediately to strengthen my position. The next 3 months were a controlled war. Melissa hired Gregory Vaughn to represent her, as I'd predicted. They mounted an aggressive defense, claiming the signature irregularity was a clerical error, that the title company had made a mistake, that I was fabricating evidence to gain advantage in the divorce. But Vincent was ready for every move. At our first hearing for temporary orders, Vincent presented Dr. Chen's forensic analysis. The judge, a woman named Catherine Thornton who'd been on the bench for 20 years, reviewed the report carefully. Then she asked Melissa's attorney if they had any expert testimony to refute Dr. Chen's findings. Gregory stammered that they'd need time to retain their own expert, that they hadn't had adequate discovery. Judge Thornton was unimpressed. She stated flatly that forensic evidence of signature forgery was extremely serious, and until it was refuted with equal expertise, she was inclined to believe the deed transfer was fraudulent. She granted my motion for temporary custody of Connor and Sophie, allowing Melissa supervised visitation twice a week. She also froze all joint assets and ordered Melissa to provide full financial disclosure within 14 days. Gregory tried to object, but Judge Thornton shut him down. She said that when one party to a marriage is accused of document forgery with expert testimony supporting that accusation, the court has a duty to protect assets until the truth is established. Watching Gregory's face fall was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Melissa sat next to him, pale and shaking. This wasn't how her plan was supposed to go. She'd thought she'd secure the house quietly, file for divorce on her terms, and walk away with the majority of our assets. Instead, she'd lost custody and had her financial access restricted. The district attorney's office moved forward with their investigation. They interviewed the notary, Sandra Kilpatrick, who quickly crumbled under questioning. Sandra admitted she'd notarized the deed without properly verifying my identity, that Melissa had paid her $500 to process the paperwork without asking questions. That admission gave the DA everything they needed. 3 weeks after our first hearing, Melissa was arrested and charged with forgery in the 2nd degree and offering a false instrument for filing. Both were felonies. I wasn't there when the police arrived at her apartment, but Patricia, who'd maintained surveillance, sent me photos. Melissa in handcuffs being led to a patrol car, head down in shame. Sandra Kilpatrick was arrested the same day on related charges. Gregory Vaughn attempted damage control. He negotiated with the DA for a plea agreement that would reduce Melissa's charges in exchange for cooperation and restitution. But the DA wasn't particularly generous. The evidence was overwhelming, and property fraud cases were taken seriously in our jurisdiction. Meanwhile, Trevor Hastings, Melissa's affair partner, completely disappeared from her life. When it became public that she was facing felony charges, he stopped returning her calls. Patricia confirmed through her sources that Trevor wanted nothing to do with the criminal case or the divorce drama. He'd been interested in an affair, not in criminal liability. The full divorce trial was scheduled for 5 months after I filed. Vincent used that time to build an absolutely devastating case. He deposed Melissa extensively, forcing her to answer questions about the forged deed, the secret accounts, her affair, her meetings with Gregory about hiding assets. She invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination 43 times during her deposition, which Vincent noted would be used to draw adverse inferences at trial. Vincent also deposed Gregory Vaughn about his communications with Melissa before I filed for divorce. Gregory tried to claim attorney-client privilege, but Vincent argued successfully that communications in furtherance of fraud were not protected. The judge ordered Gregory to produce his file and testify about what Melissa had asked him to do. It turned out Melissa had explicitly asked Gregory how to transfer our house to her name, only without my knowledge or consent. Gregory had advised her on the refinance scheme, though he claimed he'd told her she needed my actual signature, not a forged one. Whether that was true or not, it demonstrated Melissa's intent to steal our property. The criminal case resolved before the divorce trial. Melissa accepted a plea agreement where she pled guilty to 1 count of attempted grand larceny and 1 count of offering a false instrument. She was sentenced to 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution of $12,000 to cover my legal costs for dealing with the fraud. Sandra Kilpatrick pled guilty to notary fraud and lost her notary license permanently. She received 1 year probation and a fine. Her testimony against Melissa had helped secure the plea agreement. By the time we went to divorce trial, Melissa had a criminal conviction on her record. Vincent argued forcefully that her fraud, her adultery, her attempts to hide assets, and her criminal conduct demonstrated she was unfit to have primary custody of Connor and Sophie. He also argued I should receive the house outright as compensation for her attempts to steal it through forgery. Melissa's defense was weak. Gregory tried to paint her as a woman who'd made mistakes under emotional stress, who'd had a momentary lapse in judgment, who still loved her children and deserved equal custody. But Judge Thornton had reviewed all the evidence, and she wasn't sympathetic. The trial lasted 3 days. Vincent methodically presented every piece of evidence Patricia had gathered. Dr. Chen testified about the forged signature with such precision that even Gregory couldn't shake his conclusions. Patricia testified about Melissa's affair, her meetings with Gregory before the divorce, her secret financial activities. I testified about discovering the fraud, about my investigation, about my commitment to my children, and my determination to protect them from a parent who'd committed felonies. Melissa testified on her own behalf, trying to appear remorseful and reformed. She claimed she'd been confused, that Trevor had manipulated her, that she'd panicked about our marriage ending and made terrible decisions. She cried on the stand, begged for forgiveness, insisted she'd never intended to actually take the house from me. Vincent destroyed her on cross-examination. He walked her through every decision she'd made, opening secret accounts, meeting with Gregory to plan asset hiding, paying Sandra to notarize a forged document, conducting an affair while living in our marital home. He asked her repeatedly if these were the actions of someone who was confused or the actions of someone executing a calculated plan. She had no good answers. Judge Thornton took 1 week to issue her decision. When Vincent called me with the news, I was in my office, trying to focus on work but unable to think about anything except the trial. Judge Thornton had awarded me primary physical custody of Connor and Sophie. Melissa would have supervised visitation for the first 6 months, then potential expansion to standard visitation if she completed parenting classes and maintained compliance with her criminal probation. The judge stated in her written decision that Melissa's fraud and criminal conduct demonstrated poor judgment and a willingness to prioritize her interests over family welfare, making her unsuitable for primary custody at this time. On property division, Judge Thornton awarded me the house outright as compensation for Melissa's attempted theft. She also awarded me 60% of our remaining marital assets, citing Melissa's dissipation of funds through secret accounts and her affair. Melissa would receive 40%, significantly less than the standard equal division. Judge Thornton also ordered Melissa to pay half of my attorney's fees, roughly $40,000, in addition to the restitution from her criminal case. The judge noted that Melissa's fraud had necessitated extensive legal work that wouldn't have been required in a standard divorce. When I hung up with Vincent, I sat in my office for a long time, processing what had happened. I'd won completely. I had my children. I had our home. I'd recovered financially despite Melissa's attempts to steal from me, and she had a criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her life. But there was no joy in it, not really. My marriage was over. My children were from a broken home. I'd spent over $100,000 fighting a woman I once loved. The victory felt necessary, justified, but not triumphant. I picked up Connor and Sophie from my parents' house that evening and told them we were going home, our real home, the house where they'd grown up. They were excited, relieved to have stability again. I didn't tell them the details of what their mother had done. That would come later when they were older and could process it. For now, I just focused on rebuilding our life. Melissa moved into a small apartment across town. Her real estate career was effectively over. Her criminal conviction made it impossible for her to maintain her license. She found work doing administrative tasks for a property management company, making a fraction of what she'd earned before. Her affair with Trevor had ended badly. Her reputation in our community was destroyed. She'd gambled everything on a fraud scheme and lost completely. Over the next year, I established a routine with Connor and Sophie. I adjusted my work schedule to be home when they got off school. I cooked dinner with them every night. I helped with homework, attended their sports games and school events, made sure they felt secure and loved. They saw Melissa twice a week for supervised visits, and gradually those visits expanded to unsupervised weekends as she proved she could be stable. The relationship between Melissa and me was civil but distant. We communicated only about the children, kept everything in writing per Vincent's advice. She never apologized to me directly for the fraud, though she told Connor and Sophie she was sorry for the divorce, framing it as mutual rather than acknowledging her criminal conduct. I eventually started dating again, about 18 months after the divorce was final. Woman named Adrian, who owned a marketing firm and had never been married. She was patient with my history, understanding about my commitment to my kids, and brought a lightness to my life I hadn't felt in years. We took things slowly, but it felt healthy and real. My consulting business actually grew during and after the divorce. I threw myself into work during the hardest periods, took on challenging projects, and built my reputation as someone who solved complex problems. Clients appreciated my focus and my results. The financial recovery from Melissa's fraud was complete within 2 years. Connor and Sophie are thriving now. Connor is 13 and plays competitive soccer. Sophie is 11 and is involved in theater. They have a relationship with their mother, though it's not what it could have been if she'd made different choices. They spend some holidays with her, occasional weekends, but their primary home is with me. They know their mother made serious mistakes, but I've never poisoned them against her. I've let them form their own conclusions based on her behavior and consistency. Melissa's supervised visitation ended after 8 months when she completed all her court-ordered requirements. She rebuilt her relationship with Connor and Sophie slowly, and to her credit, she's been consistent with visitation for the past 3 years. She'll never have primary custody. Judge Thornton's order was clear about that, but she's part of their lives in a limited way. The criminal conviction changed her permanently. She lost career opportunities, social standing, and the respect of people who'd known her for years. The fraud scheme that was supposed to secure her financial future instead destroyed it. She'll be working administrative jobs for the foreseeable future, living in a modest apartment, dealing with the consequences of her choices for the rest of her life. As for me, I learned that trust is earned through consistency, not assumed through marriage. Certificates. I learned that staying calm and strategic beats emotional reactions every single time. And I learned that protecting what's yours sometimes requires you to destroy what someone else is trying to take. The house Melissa tried to steal is worth about $570,000 now, appreciated over the past 4 years. Every time I look at it, I remember what she attempted and how completely her plan failed. It's not just a house anymore. It's a monument to the power of evidence, preparation, and refusing to be a victim. Connor and Sophie are growing up in a stable home with a parent who showed them that justice matters, that actions have consequences, and that you fight for what's right even when it's difficult. Those are lessons worth the cost of everything I went through. Melissa forged my signature and tried to steal my house. I hired a private investigator, built an overwhelming case, and destroyed her completely in both criminal and divorce court. She lost the house, lost custody, gained a criminal record, and ruined her career. Meanwhile, I have my children, my home, my business, and my dignity. That's not revenge. That's justice. And sometimes justice is the most satisfying outcome possible.